The 19th of December 1944, a forest clearing near Wiltz, Luxembourg, 6 miles behind what used to be the American line. Snow is falling sideways through broken pine branches. An SS camp groupie moves through canvas tents that were abandoned less than 4 hours ago. A coffee pot is still warm on a field stove. A German lieutenant steps through a tent flap and stops mid-stride. Wooden crates line the walls, stenciled with white lettering. Glass vials sit in open cases, unbroken, catalogued, untouched by looting hands, because no one here yet understands what they are looking at. Outside, the sound of American artillery is already retreating westward. Inside this tent, something else is happening, a much quieter kind of shock. The lieutenant is 26. 4 years on the Eastern Front, 3 wound stripes on his sleeve. He has seen field hospitals before his own, hastily built, chronically short of everything. He does not yet know that the crate in front of him holds more sulfa powder than his entire division carries combined. He does not know that 6 feet away, in a supply chest meant for individual infantrymen, there are more plasma kits than his division's central medical depot received in the last 3 months. He is carrying a flashlight, a notebook, and an assumption that is about to break. This is not a story about a captured tent full of medical supplies. It is a story about what happens when one army treats a wounded soldier as an acceptable loss, and another treats him as a problem to be solved. This is not a story about morphine and plasma. It is a story about industrial capacity, translated into individual human survival carried, quite literally, in every rifleman's pocket. Think about what that means for a moment. By the winter of 1944, an ordinary American private in the Ardennes was carrying more consistent, standardized trauma care on his own body than a German field hospital could reliably promise its patients. The thesis is simple, and it is devastating in its simplicity. America did not just outproduce Germany's tanks and planes. It outproduced Germany's ability to keep its own soldiers alive on someone else's battlefield. To understand what that SS lieutenant found in that tent, you have to go back further than December 1944, back past Pearl Harbor, past the mobilization of 1941, to a set of decisions made in the years after the First World War. When American medical officers studied the staggering death rates of 1914 to 1918 and asked an uncomfortable question, how many of those men didn't have to die? The answer that emerged, championed by figures like Colonel Edward Churchill, an American surgeon who would go on to reshape battlefield medicine doctrine, was not a single invention. It was a philosophy, the idea that survival was a matter of time, standardization, and forward positioning of care, not heroic individual surgery performed too late. Out of this came the doctrine of echelon medicine. Treat shock immediately. Stop hemorrhage immediately. Evacuate fast. Operate close to the line. It sounds obvious now. In 1943 it was radical. That doctrine needed 2 things. Germany could never fully assemble by 1944, an uninterrupted pharmaceutical supply chain, and the industrial discipline to standardize a medical kit down to the individual soldier. American plasma production, scaled up through the Blood for Britain program, and then the national plasma donation drives of 1941 to 1943, turned a scarce battlefield resource into a mass-manufactured one. Sulfanilide powder, discovered commercially in the 1930 seconds, was packaged into single-use paper sachets and issued by the millions. Morphine syrettes, collapsible tubes with a built-in needle, invented specifically to let an untrained soldier self-administer a safe dose in the field, were stamped out by pharmaceutical plants running around the clock in Indiana and New Jersey. None of this was a secret weapon. It was a supply chain. And a supply chain, unlike a tank, cannot be captured, copied or reverse-engineered from a single tent in a Luxembourg forest. That is what made this discovery so disorienting for the men standing in it. By late 1944, the standard US EOS Army first aid pouch, carried by every rifleman, contained a compressed field dressing, sulfanilamide powder, and depending on unit and date, a morphine syrette for self-treatment or body treatment under fire. This was not equipment reserved for medics. It was baseline equipment for the man pulling the trigger. Behind him sat the aid station, typically within a few hundred yards of the front, where a battalion surgeon and his assistants performed triage and stabilized shock using whole blood and, increasingly by 1944, dried plasma reconstituted on the spot. Behind that sat the clearing station, then the field hospital, the very kind of tent complex the SS lieutenant was standing inside, where actual surgery happened, sometimes within 1 to 2 hours of wounding. That number matters. 1 to 2 hours. German frontline surgeons, hampered by fuel shortages, fractured supply lines, and the collapsing rail network of late 1944, were frequently looking at delays of 6, 8, 12 hours for the same category of casualty. The numbers behind this system are staggering when placed side by side. The U.S. Army's plasma program alone processed over 13 million units of donated blood plasma during the war. American pharmaceutical manufacturers produced sulfa drugs at a scale measured in the billions of tablets and doses. By contrast, German army medical stores by the winter of 1944 to 1945 were running critical shortages of nearly every one of these categories, a direct consequence of Allied strategic bombing on German pharmaceutical and chemical production, combined with the total collapse of German rail logistics, feeding the Ardennes offensive. Colonel Churchill's own written case for forward surgery captured the doctrine in a single documented line, that the survival of the wounded depended not on heroics, but on getting definitive treatment to the soldier before shock became irreversible. That sentence, quiet as it sounds, is the entire hidden engine behind what that SS lieutenant found in the tent. It was not one miracle drug. It was time, multiplied by supply, multiplied by standardization, applied to a single human body at the worst moment of that body's existence. If this story matters to you, a like keeps it visible. Then we keep going, because the next part of this story is not American. It's German, and it's about a man who could not write down what he saw. German medical officers who encountered captured American field hospitals during the Ardennes offensive left behind a consistent pattern in post-war accounts and interrogation records. Not envy exactly, but a kind of professional vertigo. Trained physicians, men who understood exactly what they were looking at, struggled to reconcile the scale of what they found with what their own army could offer a wounded soldier. What comes through in these accounts is not simple admiration for a piece of equipment. It is the specific, quiet horror of a professional recognizing a system built entirely around a premise his own army had abandoned out of necessity, that every soldier's survival was worth the same standardized investment, dressing, drug, and evacuation slot, regardless of rank or unit prestige. German elite formations like the Waffen-SS divisions received better medical priority than an ordinary Wehrmacht infantry regiment. The American system, by comparison, did not appear to ration care by unit prestige at all. That, more than the plasma or the morphine itself, is what unsettled men who had spent years inside a wartime medical hierarchy built on scarcity and triage by importance, rather than triage by wound. Behind every syrette and sachet in that tent was a name that history barely kept. A battalion surgeon in his late 20s, likely a general practitioner in civilian life 18 months earlier, now responsible for triage decisions under artillery fire with almost no sleep. A medic 19, 20 years old, running between craters, with a bag whose weight he had memorized down to the ounce. Somewhere in the retreat from that same clearing near Wiltz, men who couldn't be evacuated in time did not survive the Bulge, plasma or not. The system was extraordinary. It was not magic. It still lost people quietly, individually, in ways that don't make it into production statistics. That is the part this story insists you sit with, not the numbers. The 20-year-old medic who ran out of morphine syrettes on the second day and had to decide in the cold, in the dark, who could wait. If your grandfather or great-uncle served in this story, his name belongs in the comments. His unit, his theatre, what he remembered. Those details are the actual record of what happened. Germany never built the equivalent of this system, not because German medicine lacked brilliant surgeons, and not because German soldiers were valued less by the men who served beside them. It came down to something colder, an economy that, by 1944, could no longer guarantee its own hospitals heat, let alone its front lines a standardized dose of plasma. Culturally, too, German military medicine remained tied to a hierarchy of who deserved care first. America's system, built by men like Edward Churchill out of the failures of the last war, was constructed instead around a single blunt premise: treat the wound, not the rank, and treat it now. Back in that tent near Wiltz, the young lieutenant closes his notebook without finishing the entry. There is nothing efficient he can write about what he has seen. He steps back out into the snow, and the war keeps moving west, indifferent to what he now understands and cannot use. Some victories in this war were won with tanks. This one was won months earlier, in a pharmaceutical plant in Indiana, in a blood bank in Chicago, in a training manual written by a surgeon who had never forgotten the death rates of 1918